It's the Lean Into Art Cast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers take a walk around a topic, try to dissect it, look at it from every conceivable angle, and then hopefully walk away with some useful thinking strategies and action plans for putting all this heavy thinking into action. We think hard about visual storytelling, so you will too, or in the immortal words of Owen Jolins, because process is fun. I'm Jersey Joe's cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hi, I'm Rob Stenzinger, a designer and coder. Hi, Jersey. How you doing?
I am, as you like to say, well, Rob. I hope you're well too.
Yeah, totally. And what's awesome, we are joined once again by a guest, Mr. Cole Glass. Welcome, Cole.
Thank you, guys.
Cole
Super
Glass, filmmaker, writer, storyteller, storytelling philosopher. You've been on a number of my shows in the past. Comics Are Great, and even a little thing that I've been doing on the side called Fabulous Secrets, where we spent a lot of time talking about story recipes. That was a fun one. But also, this is where we got to start before we go into curveball into main topic, is that we also had you on the Comics Are Great show, episode 97, and Dean Tripp was also on that one, and that one was entitled "What's So Great About Batman?"
Mm-hmm.
So we got to ask you on this show, for the people who didn't listen to that one, what is so great about Batman, Cole? You had some really some terrific things to say about him as a character.
Yeah, it was a it's a question I've devoted my life to. I think that I just love Batman as a character, superhero. He represents turning tragedy into a strength, and he represents the human spirit. And so for me, he just pushes all the right buttons. Yeah, I love him.
One of the things you said during the Comics Great episode, which I thought was awesome, is you said you can't love humanity and not love Batman. Or if you don't love Batman, you don't love humanity.
Right. Like if Superman is your favorite superhero, then you actually are loving somebody that's not human. You're not rooting for your home team, basically. It's kind of how I
Well, or you're very optimistic about the aliens who might come and, I don't know, take things over. That's
right.
Somewhat bleak, but somewhat optimistic for a bleak outlook. I don't know. That was an awesome
we should all
episode.
hope that the aliens are Superman. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. I think that that's one of the first times I'd heard you and Jersey chatting, and so no, it's really cool to have you here. But you have, you are essentially an independent movie maker, and that's I think you may be like the first sort of director and film creator we've had on the show. So how did you get into that? And just
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very honored. I just as a kid, I was always really interested in movies, and I was a very creative kid, and I was kind of drawing all the time. And I there was a time, and it was funny because I got a little flack on the previous show with Jersey about saying, well, I wanted to be a comic book artist, but then, I just had friends who were so much better than me, so I went to filmmaking, which kind of made it sound like I did. I kind of like gave up one, but in reality, I found my true path. Filmmaking, when I kind of discovered it, really made a lot of sense to what I was trying to accomplish with all the stuff that I was doing. I love drawing, but I really just wanted to tell stories, and telling stories visually, and all these things. So it was interesting. I was very interested in being an artist of some sort. I didn't really have a good direction on that one. But then I took an intro film class at Mesa Community College, and they just kind of laid it out. And they said, film is art, and here's, they were showing us these different scenes and explaining what was going on in the bit, like all these subtle things that you would just miss. And it blew my mind, and I was like, this is kind of encapsulating all the things that I loved, like all the things that I was trying to do as a different kinds of arts, in one. And so that's kind of started it from there for me.
That's I know that's kind of it's really cool to hear your thoughts on that, and just as a way to just get introduced to you and introduce you to the audience and whatnot, because I know that's going to be our sort of interesting different takes on visual storytelling will be a big part of our main topic. But before we get into that, we'll end up getting a little warmed up.
Yes, we warm up with this thing called the curveball, which is a question where we're not really looking for like an advicey kind of answer, more of just like trying to challenge ourselves to think really hard about something a little bit. And ideally, we try to find a curveball that is somehow related to the topic, or sometimes not even at all, but we just find that we discovered that it is related to the main topic. And to tease everybody, the main topic is how much do you prepare for going on a quest to make a narrative thing, right? The title was A Dungeon Crawl for Narrative, right? So, like, making a thing, you can sometimes have an idea of what you want the thing to be, but then you discover what the thing actually is through the act of making it, a lot of times, right? So how much do you prepare for that? But we'll get into that. But related to the topic, I've got a curveball that I want to pitch at you guys and see what you think. And like I said before we started recording, Rob, this could be either awesome or completely just plop on the ground. As people who make things, improv or plan ahead? Where do you, on that, if that's the spectrum, where do you think you fall and why? Is it, and when I say why, it's like from personal experiences, like I've been burned once, never again, or is it something where it's just your disposition? Like, where do you fall in that spectrum, and why do you think you fall there?
I would like to hear from our guest first. What do you think on that, Cole?
What's funny is I'm just, if my video is working, you'd see me just grinning and shaking my head.
We should say that Cole is actually at the Emerald City Comic Con this weekend, if anybody wants to high-five him if you're watching live before the show. And he's talking to us on hotel Wi-Fi, which is why we don't have video and why the audio gets like a little bit stammery every once in a while, but it's still serviceable. So with that preface, I just bought you some time, Cole, with some vamping there.
And I probably also add that Jake Parker and Henry walk in, and they said they'd be quiet, but I don't know how. Anyway, neither here nor there. What the question? Your question.
Yes.
Improv bad word to me, and it is because it's not really that bad a word, but I generally don't like improv. Now I'm thinking of improv as more literal, like, do I let actors do improv on the set? And I've had when we did Orc Wars, which is now called Dragonfire, as rednecks, and it was very difficult working with them. Well, no, I enjoyed working with them, but it was hard to rein them in. These very elaborate camera shots. If you having your lines, then the shots aren't going to clear because they're saying different. We had like these very elaborate moves, and they were going to cut together.
What I'm picking up on there, Cole, is that you're talking about in filmmaking, like there are so many moving parts that you kind of can't be quite as improvisational and playful with it, right?
That's what I was picking up on. I think we're definitely getting some audio dropout, but it sounded like the sort of setting up of a scene and having the detailed shots and all the, I would imagine the role of the storyteller as the director and the writer having all of their voice being involved and setting up all those foundational elements, then to have someone maybe go off in a different direction the foundational elements weren't necessarily prepared to deal with, neither in execution nor in maybe the outcome, where that could be perhaps too influential on the initial plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you guys can you hear me now?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
There was just like a little bit of latency buffer delay there going on. So.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Was
Gotcha.
that sort of
I think
was that kind of going in the direction you were thinking, Cole?
Yeah. I think that there's a time and place for it, and there's a whole genre, called mumblecore. That's all, and I'm not a big fan, but there are people who are huge fans of it. But I generally like something that's more.
Oh, I think we dropped out again, Cole.
Yep, dropped out again. So,
have you not
I'm
heard
happy
of
to
Have
mumblecore.
you not heard of
totally
mumblecore,
not.
Rob?
No.
What were you to suggest?
What in the world is mumblecore now? We can't.
Mumblecore is, as I understand it, and maybe if Cole gets back in, he can correct me if I'm wrong on this. But it's usually movies about young people, like in either their mid to late 20s, dealing with life in this very kind of stoic, quiet way, and they literally talk really low like this, and it almost sounds like mumbling.
Really?
Yeah. So yeah, it's like a whole genre of film.
I'm the.
Hey, you guys can hear me? Sorry.
Oh wow! Yeah, you sound great.
Yeah, I'm doing it on my phone this time. No video probably helps.
Okay, cool. So I was explaining to Rob what mumblecore was as you were just when you dropped out.
Yeah. So I think that improv, and I'm sure this isn't quite. This is probably more specific than you were thinking, but in filmmaking, you plan everything you possibly can plan, so then when you get to the day and a new idea comes up, you can be flexible enough to incorporate that or even assess it properly, So I think there is some nice improv. You just plan for everything, but when it comes to actors, there's been a couple times when I've had actors come to me and say, "Can I change some lines, or can I try it?" And I'm like, as long as you give me what's in the script, we can try something. But I like being prepared and having something crafted more than just waiting for. They're like, okay, let's go film this. But like Christopher Guest does his documentaries are hilarious, and they're all largely improvised. So.
I could be wrong, but isn't that how Larry David does some of his shows, like Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff? Like a lot of that is just them just kind of hocking around and being playful on the set.
Yeah, I think so. And it's done to different degrees of successfulness, but yeah, for me, it's all about. I love something that's well crafted and all the like Rob was saying, all the pieces are moving together, and it's hard if you have a one cog that wants to do its own thing.
And we should say, just to provide some extra context to what we were just talking about here, you mentioned Dragonfire with a Y, which was originally called Orc Wars, which we'll link to in the show notes. In that film, you've described it as the Chronicles of Narnia in reverse. Rather than going into the magical world is opened and the monsters come into our world. And you have these machine gun wielding, I think there's some special mission guys, but then there's also some general toughs in it, right?
Yeah. If the main character is this special forces guy that kind of gets roped into it by destiny, and then
that's right.
He's
you've got the mystical character who says you're the chosen one, you got to do this thing comes around every so often, and you got to step up.
The blind Native American mentor. Yeah.
But you're dealing with computer special effects. You're dealing with lots and lots of extras. You're dealing with, like uh, weather, set pieces, and things. So there's a lot of moving parts for you to deal with, right? So like you can't. The job demands that you're not quite as like whimsical and playful in that situation, right?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Like the scene where I kind of let the actors when I was struggling to have rein them in was a scene where it was just like rednecks hanging out being rowdy, and it was
Yeah.
we had some stuff written, but it wasn't necessarily super important like, oh, you have to say this. It was like we're getting to know the rednecks. And so, but again, whenever in the scenes where it was kind of a wide, it was okay. But if we moved the camera, if we had some camera moves, it got pretty hairy.
Yeah.
But improv is one of those things where like people take classes for it, and like to learn how to like just take the moment and create upon it is very admirable and kind of wonderful. But on the other hand, it's not always useful. And I stress always because there's sometimes it is useful, but I think improv works best when you're super prepared and you've got space to do it.
That's great. See, this is why I love Curveball, is that it's a really great way to get sort of like the landscape of everybody's like standpoints and opinions on this kind of thing. So, Rob, I want to hear what or where do you fall on that spectrum?
Let's see. I think they're both different tools that are just well suited to different creative tasks. So when I hear something that is more a complex orchestration of many parts, you inherently have to manage the risk of what kind of outcome you want to get through that. So it's about having a lot more, specific control and specific roles and coordination to just get to that specific result out of those many complicated parts. And that's that sometimes, well, okay, so that's what I see overall, like where that can be a strong tool in those, if you're really in that situation. But then if you're not in that situation, and you're doing something that's perhaps even more generative, and you're in the act of creating versus executing on some established creative plan, right? Like if you're making playing something in an orchestra, or making a movie, that's a lot more. You're making a movie with many parts where you have different teams and you have the special effects versus those that are filming and audio. I mean, there's so many parts to coordinate there. Versus, well, you're a group of people trying to generate dialogue that's engaging in a room or what have you. The complexity is just way less. What I find though is that sometimes people assume they're in one situation and they're not, right? A lot of times I see the orchestra as an approach, like on software teams, is that it feels safer to try to rein in all the controls, when I find that a lot of times if you let them loose and people can iterate on ideas and get out their assumptions in an improvisational manner, then you have a chance to sort of actually get this weird hybrid where you're actually very disciplined, yet you're doing a lot of responding to what you're discovering in the moment. And that could be a matter of what's really important, who is this thing you're making for, and whatever. And so again, I mean, it depends on what you're making. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I might have dodged it.
I would have to say I agree with Rob 100%. And my favor for plannedness over improv is mainly just a personal one, and not a value call on the whole system.
Yeah.
If you like to make things up as you go along, you're nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and I guess I don't mean to make an overly value judgment on the complex orchestration as well, because again, I think there's important places for it.
No,
Yeah.
I mean this could be almost an entire topic in and of itself. I almost feel tempted to go there, because then we could start talking about like how do you know, and everybody's like where everybody's motivations are aligned, and everybody, like, the outcome is all agreed upon by everybody. All right, we're not going to go into all that because like we start picking this thing apart, and we're just going to go down a rabbit hole because we got a topic to deal with. But thank you guys. Awesome way to help navigate that spectrum in a thoughtful way, and not just in a well, this is just the best way. That's all. So, are you guys ready to head to main topic then?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. So, cue in the music. Time to go 10,000 feet up. Look at the topic and abstract. Look at it from every conceivable angle. Look for some hidden dimensions and depths. See if we can understand it a little bit more deeply. And the title was Dungeon Crawl. Dungeon Crawl for narrative. You're setting out to do a thing. I've got an idea for a thing. I'm going to do a book about, let's see, a triceratops who becomes a computer salesman. I mean, the premise is pretty good. It's got hooks. It's got legs. I think you can go somewhere with it. But what's it really about? I don't know yet. I won't know until I get in there and start making the thing. Because the making of the thing is when like narrative starts revealing itself to you as you start solving all these creative problems. So, with that in mind, what I thought would be fun to talk about this week, especially with Cole, since we talked about all like this sort of pre-planning you have to do as a filmmaker, and because I know Cole is a guy who thinks really, really freaking hard about story and craftsmanship, how much do you prepare for the dungeon crawl for narrative, right? How much research, planning, thinking, writing do you do before you go in and finally go, okay, I'm ready to take on the thing? And I've done both ways. I've done books where I've written for 2 years before I set pen to paper on the final art, and then I've done ones where it's like, I'm doing a book today, and then I just scribble out, in an afternoon, I get like a mini comic done. And both have their, pleasures and perils. But so the premise I wanted to start with, that I wanted to propose to you guys, is that for the person who has the idea for the project, but they don't necessarily have it like fully fleshed out into like a beating heart thing yet, they just have an idea for a thing. How much do you start preparing? So to begin with, I'm wondering, what does your preparation cycle look like? When you're getting ready to start a project, you got an itch to do a certain kind of thing. My Triceratops becoming a computer salesman thing. I got to do this story. There's something there. What is your preparation cycle to finally engaging and making it look like? I wonder if you could characterize it for me.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Rob?
Oh, no, I really would love to hear from you, Cole. I mean, you're a guest, and
well, thank you.
I'm really curious.
It's funny because there was a time when I was younger and starting out, and that starting point was so daunting because it was like suddenly you could see all the different ways that this story could go, right?
Yep.
And
yes.
And it was like, and there's no real indication which path is the right path or which path might be better than another path. Like you're just going, oh man, I could have my character, end up being a bad guy. He could end up being a good guy. I mean, like you don't even know. And
oh my gosh, yes.
And it's like at the time it was just so daunting that sometimes it would paralyze me creatively, where I'm just like I can't, and that paralyzing is the enemy. It's not the options, right? Like you freeze up because you're scared to step down any one of these paths, and suddenly there's other paths that you're like, oh no, I should have explored this one and I've explored the wrong one. And so for me, I've gotten a lot better about that, but basically I start writing questions, because when I write a question, it's not solid. Like, what if my main character was female instead of male? Or what if, and like you start asking, you see all these paths, and you phrase them in questions like, what if he goes and does this? And what if he goes and this? And suddenly you're building up this kind of like nebulous body of ideas. But I find, and of course everyone's going to be different, but I find that if I stage him, instead of saying he goes here, that's like I've just committed to that idea. But if I say, what if he goes here?
Oh, that's great.
And I retain the right to say no. And you kind of build it up, but then once you start seeing it, you do start seeing which paths are better, you know. And I usually try. So one of the first things I try to do, even before I do that, is try to make sure I understand all of the limitations and requirements for that project, be they budget or, you know, like right now I'm talking with some guys about doing a series, and I can't start writing that series until I know how many episodes we're going to do, right? Like I can't start plotting it. And so it's like that's the next step, is to find out how many chapters, how many whatever. And because I mean, you guys know as well as I do that the more restrictions you have on your creativity, the more focused your creativity can be. Yeah. So I like to gather all the limitations and the requirements and say, okay, well, you know, like I have this kind of budget, which means I'm not going to be doing this kind of stuff. And I have them all in place, and then that's when I start writing the questions. I start brainstorming, oh, what if this happens and this happens and this happens? It's kind of a free write, and I even kind of start doing some character bios where I'm like, you know, this person, and I just make sure that mentally I understand that this is all fluid. Like everything can change. I'm not going to create anything concrete until I'm ready. And I think a lot of times people, and I know I've done this a lot in the past, is you're like, okay, I'm going to start writing a book, and you sit down and you write a chapter, and you're like, I don't know where to go next, and I just wrote a chapter of a book that I, you know, like it, and you. That's what we want to do. Our initial idea is like, I want to start creating the actual thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, because Cole, I don't want to throw away all that effort. I just wrote a chapter of a book. Are you telling me that that's going to change? That sucks. That's what we call wasted effort.
Right. And you just, like, you have to just, it's kind of like treating yourself very kindly by saying, create this document of just ideas, you know, and it's very interesting because once you have to sit down and try to do something concrete, that's when the writer's block or you get paralyzed. But if you keep promising to yourself that all of this is just you know, you're just getting ready, and it's not, and it stays fluid, then you can write anything you want, you know, like you'd be surprised at just how many ideas just flow out of you. And, you know, and there's all these, of course, there's writing exercises that say, you know, like, now think about, you know, what if you switched the protagonist and the antagonist, like those kind of ideas. That's where you put them in. You know, it's like, okay, well, what if I did do a story where it's like, you know, and then you have something to create from. Yeah. And it's not a daunting thing, but you have all this fodder to move into the next phase, which, by the way, is not working on the actual thing.
Cole, you're just bumming out like every beginning creator in the entire world.
And I hope, yeah, it's a hard lesson. It was a hard lesson for me, and it really, like, I read it in a couple different writing books about just like, don't jump into your script until you have it plotted. Like, that's where you're going to write some really horrible stuff, and that's where you're going to get writer's block. You know, just hold off. And because writer's block is usually just being afraid of what to write next, because you don't know what to write next, you know. If you always know what to write next, you know, the next day you wake up and it's like, okay, it's time to write. I know what I'm going to write. And you're like itching to get there. Whereas if it's like, okay, it's time to write, I don't know what to write. And you get like, you know, this is when like the anxieties attack you. And anyway, putting off working on the actual thing as long as possible is key to, I think, developing your lead in your.
No, to back up and underline some of the things that you said there that really, you know, connected for me is knowing what the limitations of the thing you're trying to make is. So, like, when I talked about like spending 2 years on something, that was on a graphic novel. That was I'm going to do a 200-page graphic novel. I'm going to have a parade of characters, and I'm going to explore, like, 6 chapters. I want to make sure that I understand what I'm trying to say through this thing before I finally get down to doing it. Whereas a mini comic, yeah, I can do that in a week or even in an afternoon. I've done a mini comic in a day before, but their limitations is like, you've got 8 pages. You don't have room to explore complex themes. You're going to have, at best, a page of action, a couple pages of character development, and maybe, hopefully, some jokes in there someplace. But really, it's like I set up my expectations early on, so it was not to get frustrated that, boy, I really wanted to have that 4-page spread of the panoramic shot of the city before we go in there to start exploring it with the characters. Well, you don't get to do that when you only got 8 pages, right?
Mm.
So even limitations of format, right?
Right, right. You got to know all that stuff before you can go. It'll really help you move forward.
Yeah,
Rob,
that resonated with me too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as somebody who's made games too, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, knowing your setting up discovering, choosing, or what have you, the constraints. Some might be there already. Some might be just a part of focusing the project or whatever. But they're super duper handy because they let you you can react to them. Because that sort of that what if technique, Cole, sounds kind of awesome. Because in a way, you can ask that, or if not a what if, but you can do a now what also, right? Where I have this constraint, now what? And start reacting. It's just that question approach is a really cool way to start generating. And then I really identified with what you said too, as far as being able to, let's see, I'm trying to think of how you phrase that, but essentially to create enough to then start shaping it before you start, and certainly not jump all the way into the end assume product, right? Because I remember I was disappointed when I was learning how to draw, seeing how why do I have to do all these stick and bubble figures, right? What I just want to draw people, that doesn't look like a person really. And so like all this sort of pre-work just was never it wasn't palatable until at some I don't know what threshold I crossed, but at some point I started to see the benefit where I did get sort of more toward what I intended with even a drawing when doing some pre-work and doing some of those foundational things that helped me shape the end product. But yeah, and the whole idea of the content thing, for me, it's I go deep into this a generative process that, as I've shared with Jersey before, I call it amassing a stupid amount of content, which can be a little bit wasteful. I think I probably could be a bit more focused during that early phase. But I've found that when I can swim in a bunch of things that I've created, doodles and outlines and generations of outlines that sort of try to refine some of these different ideas, I end up finding one or more of them that resonate, at least in the early phase. But
yeah, I think it's always better to have more than you need at the
is there a point where you feel it's wasteful though, or do you think that's a
no, I've at least I've never hit the part where I'm like, this is, like usually when I have too much, I'm feeling great, I'm just like, this is great. I just have so much to choose from. It's usually when I have too little that it's a bad feeling.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I'm gonna have to try to rechannel that then, and get drunk off of it because I feel like I went too far. It's like, okay, that was a good party, but now, people are jumping on the bed and crap fell off the wall. That's too far. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you're having ideas that are now changing like the things that you're trying to accomplish, and you start off and you're trying to tell a fairy tale and suddenly you're telling a romantic comedy that's set in an office, that might have been like
Okay,
if
that's
if
true.
if it draws away from where you're trying, what you're originally trying to. But what if you really like your romantic comedy in The Office a lot better than, like, I guess it's where you end up if you like it better. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, so I guess if that still fits within your constraints and you're open to it, it's you're still you still. So when do you know you've had that you've had enough? It sounds like maybe being satisfied is an indicator, but
It's like when like rubbing yourself and being like, ah, right?
okay,
It's like
I
that
get it.
feeling, but in your brain.
Yeah. I every time I write a script, it's a little bit different. I'm always kind of amazed at how I have a really vague writing technique that kind of evolves with each project. And like sometimes I do the three by five cards, and other times I don't as much. But I know that, like, well, just as an example, there was a time when I was writing this thriller that was kind of set. It was four people who were stuck in a cave, and the whole premise was that we had to shoot it in one location with four actors. And so I sat down and I said, okay, if I was stuck in a cave, what are the things that I would try to do? What are the things that I would talk about? What would I, and I just got my three by five cards and I just wrote. And then, um, and then I laid it out in my structure. And when I saw that I had enough cards, I'd be like, okay, like, and that's the nice thing about the cards is you can switch them around. You can, like, oh, well, let's put this conversation earlier and we'll have this, and, but that one was kind of, I keep thinking about this one as it pertains to this question because I literally filled up cards of ideas and then I laid them out into my story, and certain cards had to precede other cards, but some cards could go wherever. And I stopped when I ran out of ideas, and there were some conversations where, like, okay, we don't need that, and there were conversations that I wrote in to the script, and then later we said we don't need them. But the idea of having too much, I don't know, that seems kind of wonderful in some ways.
Okay.
If you guys ever, when I was a kid, I remember playing the Palladium role-playing system. Maybe it was GURPS, but some guys put together this zombie game, and I think they actually had like a supplement that went with it. But like the game started with, they would set a 60-second egg timer, 60 seconds on an egg timer, and you had to write down everything that you could think of that might be in the house that you're in when the zombie apocalypse happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And so, like, it was this race against the clock to, like, okay, what else can I think of? Like, and, like, of course the GM would be like, no, you don't have a case of dynamite. You don't have a howitzer, But it's like, that's the kind of situation where it's like, can you really have too much stuff?
Right.
No, that's too much
Right.
water. You have too much bottled water, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, you can just save it for later. Just like the bottled water.
But I love this. I love this idea of doing the index cards. I mean, this is a lesson I do with my kids in my classrooms. Is I will write out a narrative on the board, and it'll be like a 9-panel narrative, and I have the kids like draw the narrative each on an index card, and then we rearrange the index cards to see if we can find an equally logical sequence of events and see how it changes the story. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you put it one way, and it's like it's this suspenseful thriller about a man being stalked. You put it another way, and it's this comical farce where this guy is misinterpreting what somebody, who seems to be chasing him isn't really chasing him at all, kind of thing, right? But this idea of, like, thumbnailing on index cards, right, so that I can just rearrange elements, and I'm not, because right now what I do is, and I don't know if I have any with me. I usually make it's like a dummy, like on a notebook, and I'll just print out squares for my pages, and I do the layout with the actual storytelling all at the same time, which makes it a little bit more painful to restructure a sequence because I have put so much thought into not only the moments and the dialogue, but also the arrangement of everything that's happening there, right?
Yeah.
I like this idea of like index carding it so that it's a little bit more casual and potentially like I think what you were saying earlier is like not you're leaving yourself an out, right? You're not
Yeah.
committing to anything yet.
You let your story stay fluid.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing about index cards is you have your ideas and then you just it just saves you. I think that when you start committing to certain things before you're sure that they're the right things is when writer's block will attack.
Yeah.
And so like I said, you once you get all your ideas, then you kind of usually I'll either write an outline or do the cards and then do an outline, and then I'll have my story and I can read it, and does it make sense? Does it feel good? And there's still a lot of vague things in there that I still have to work out at the script level, but it's kind of like every step you go more and more specific. You go from general to specific. You don't want to jump right into specifics because you will run dry and not know what to do next.
Well, it's also a triage of the creative battles that you're facing when you're doing this too, right? It's like right now, I'm not going to concern myself with the dialogue and writing like not on the nose dialogue, like writing dialogue that reveals something about the character as well as something about the plot and all that stuff you're supposed to do. I'm not going to face that battle right now because right now I'm worried about lighting, composition, staging, pacing. Let me face those battles here. We'll face the dialogue at a different part of the game, right? Like in comics, for me, it's like, okay, there's like the thumbnailing, which is layout, pacing, and picking my shots, but I'm not worried about drawing it right. That's later. I'll face that creative battle at another time because taking it all on at once would be overwhelming, which is why when you start making a new thing or a thing for the first time, and you just want to make the thing. Like, I'm going to make video games. Well, I just grabbed some pixels, right?
Right, right.
From the screen.
You're like, I'm going to animate my character, and you're like, what is the story going to be? Yeah, I think. I just forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was kind of buckshotting with a lot of things there, and
it was something along those lines. But anyway, if I'll remember, I'll bring it up.
Okay, Rob, you look thoughtful.
No, it's this that you mentioning video game development. This is it's very true. It's kind of funny because if I think you can basically go back. I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for this, but essentially you have elements of your creative process that are general, some that are specific, as Cole said. But like you typically would want to go from general to specific, but yet there's this element of the constraints are specific. So in a way, you start with just enough specific things that help seed the rest, but then you don't stay in that specific mode where, like you described your story, your approach to sometimes the whole working like in a dummy comic form, and then that sort of it almost it's like working in a less flexible medium in a way, where in a way that could be perfect because you're using, maybe that's a constraint and it serves your creative process, but another way it's tying to specifics early, maybe
Tying to
right?
specifics in terms of like format length.
Exactly, yeah, where there's a lot of those.
I found one of my dummies and I can show people what I'm talking about here. So this is like from one of the Captain Seriously books that I did. Yep. And yeah, I'm picking out aspect ratio. I'm picking out how many panels I can fit on the page. I'm working out how much dialogue can fit on the page. I'm working out my shots. There's a high level of specificity there. Oh, and I'm working out my page count, right? Like when I get the project, I've got 12 pages. That's all I get. So I'm figuring out, okay, where the beat's going to hit, where's the climax going to hit, and how many pages do I got for resolution on this thing.
Well, and it's a matter. So maybe I guess to try to describe what I was attempting to describe a little better, maybe it's a matter of you have a list of specifics, and if you just keep that list to be a nice, helpful starter set versus too big of a list, right?
Yeah.
So you could say 12 pages. You could say, of just a few of those things. But maybe once the longer the list gets, I think the more you're starting to fall into the losing the benefit of being more general in the early stages.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I remembered what I was going to say.
Okay.
Um, I think that I you know like there's all these quotes about how horrible writing is, and you know the easiest thing in the world is to not write, and the hardest thing in the world um, is to have an idea that whatever. And I I think there's a lot of truth in these things where like we there's always this huge disconnect between what we want to create and then actually bringing that to fruition. Um, and so all these little things that we're talking about is like, okay, start with your things, your limitations, and then brainstorm, and then do this. It basically breaks these things up into bite-sized, accomplishable tasks. And they're not necessarily always right for everyone, but I think that everyone needs to have some kind of system in place for themselves to kind of be able to do this. It's like, you know, you can it's like standing at the foot of a skyscraper and thinking, I have to jump to the top of that. And you're like, well, no, not really. Just go in and take it step at a time, and you get there, you know. But a lot of times people look at it and they're like, okay, write a book and it's a skyscraper, or make a movie and it's a skyscraper. And so I think that's one of the keys to being creative is to always approach your creativity in these bite-sized things. And because, you know, I think there are definitely people out there who can say, I'm going to write a book today and sit down and write a whole book, you know, maybe 10 minutes at a time, and they're not plotting out, and it's fine. But for them, that works, you know. But I know that for me, I can't. Like, I will hit a point where I'm like, I don't know what to have happen yet because I don't know the ending, and how can I, you know, like I need to kind of know the ending, reverse engineer it, and you know, and I thought it was interesting how you were talking about dungeon crawls and how like you don't you start off and you're trying to like make your way through the thing, but ultimately you want to be the DM who can look down at the whole map and know exactly where everything is. You want the DM perspective of it.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, you don't. I couldn't find my way through a story, um, dungeon crawl style. Like I would need to say, okay, the final boss is going to be here, and he's going to be here, and then they need to know these clues, so we're going to set him up along here and stuff, and you see it. But sometimes it is to get to that point, you kind of have to say dungeon crawl.
Yeah, I mean that for me, it's a long, long slog to get to the DM's perspective, and you have to go through the dungeon. So maybe here to like complicate my metaphor, the dungeon crawl is the process, but instead of finding the treasure at the end after you slay the thing, you just get DM's perspective. Maybe it's more
Right.
like Mario World, where after you finally do save the princess, you just get to play the game and start at any level you want, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
because like even though like so I want to use this as a segue to another question for both you guys, and as a crass way to plug my own webcomic. So I'm going to grab a screen share. So I'm working on this webcomic called Boulder and Fleet, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I'm discovering, even though I have it plotted out, I have it thumbnailed, or not thumbnailed, but I have the overall draft of the arc of the plot figured out. I have the ending figured out, but all the stuff in between is kind of fuzzy. And I'm finding that I'm navigating this tension between doing things that are clever and doing things that are clear, right? So I'm working the square format, and I'm like, well, I want to see how much I can do with a square format. I want to see if I can, really be inventive while still telling a clear story for young people in this square format, right? So I've got on the screen. Can you see the screen at all, Cole, or no?
Mhm. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. So this is page 22, which updated like a week and a half ago. The original draft of the page, the original thumbnail, panel 2, the villain character was coming from a different direction. I had her coming from right to left, and it was to make this kind of S flow on the page that I was very proud of, where we naturally read her first 2 balloons, and then we instantly go down to the right side of panel 2 and then follow her blast to the bottom left-hand corner to follow the action moving to the right in panel 3. But some very astute friends pointed out that, well, that creates a weird tangent between her beam in panel 2 and the beam in panel 3. Plus, it's a little confusing to see her on the right, but then see the heroes on the right when she's apparently shooting at them. So they, recommended that I flip her. I flip the shot, have her coming in from the left to right, which kind of diffused my S pattern, but it did read a lot better. It read a lot more clearly, right? So I'm curious if you guys have ever struggled with this. Now I'm going to shut off my screen sharing. Curious if you guys have ever struggled with this tension between when you're making the thing and you're exploring the ideas of the thing, the tension between artistic prowess and being a servant to clarity to the audience. Have you guys ever struggled with showing off your stuff and that getting in the way of servicing the project? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that happens quite a bit. I heard.
Good. I feel better then.
I heard somebody was talking about, it was like one of the producers on a Wes Anderson movie, and he was talking about how the nice thing is that Wes Anderson has a lot of subtlety, and he can maintain that subtlety, but usually subtlety is the first thing that goes from a film. Like, you're trying to tell your story, and kind of as an example, I did a spot for a short for BYU TV that I didn't write. I just directed it, and the writer had this whole Adam and Eve motif, and to the point where we had paintings, because it was set in the 1800s Paris, and we built a little whatever, and we had these paintings of Adam and Eve on the wall, and then there was kind of this motif with the apple, and it was all it was very brilliant to me. I thought the writer had just really infused this really great motif, and in the edit we cut all that stuff out because it was too the story was taking too long, and it's okay, what do? Do you want to have this kind of symbolic motif, or do you want it to be boring, or not boring, and so in the end, you there's so many stuff that you I usually, every time I make a film, we usually end up cutting something that I put in there as this is going to be so cool, and not everyone's going to get it, but it's well, if not everyone's going to get it, and the movie's going long, that's gone, So I think it's very important to be clear over whimsical or symbolic or subtle, but I also think it's really important to fight for those things, and it's become my quest in my career to figure out how to infuse subtlety so much that it cannot be cut.
Oh God, that's a great line. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, to where it's so the example that I showed earlier with the Boulder and Fleet page would be, and I'm just saying this for myself. I'm not saying that anybody was insinuating this. I would say it was a failure to achieve that infusion, right? I really wanted to do a clever layout, but that clever layout that I had chosen was insufficient in terms of clarity. But in the perfect world, you get that cleverness and clarity both at the same time.
Right.
Ugh. That's what makes this stuff worth fighting for me.
Yeah, it's I think subtlety, especially in our day and age, is under attack, and we're losing a lot of the subtle. You watch older movies, and those guys were doing some incredibly subtle stuff that just gave their stories an amazing subtext, and I feel not a lot of people, there's not a lot of practitioners of that anymore.
Can you name an example? What's one old movie that people should watch right now to pick up on that subtlety that you're talking about?
Yeah, I wish I had a less. I wish I. I'm gonna say I wish I had a more esoteric version, example, I should say. But Uh, if you look at Psycho,
Okay.
Alfred Hitchcock, you look at the scene where uh, Janet Leigh is packing up. She's stolen the money and she's about to leave. And it's where she comes out, and there's a lot of really cool stuff about like the color of her underwear. Like in the first scene, she's wearing a white bra, and the next scene after she's stolen the underwear, she's wearing a black bra. There's stuff like that. But if you look at that scene and how it's shot, and you look at the walls, there are pictures of people that you could, I guess, you're just gonna like guess that they are her parents, photographs of her parents, and they're always kind of like looking over her shoulder as she's packing up, thinking about what to do and with this money, you know. And like, this isn't something that's like, oh, we're gonna show a close up of the parents and they're going like looking at her like disappointed or whatever. It's just like she's just packing up, but suddenly this scene is about her fighting with her conscience about actually running away with this money. She could take the money back and no one would know.
Yeah.
And to have people looking over her shoulder, like literally looking over her shoulder, gives that scene that subtext of this battle of consciousness. Your parents kind of represent like your conscious, right? Like you're like, okay, you know, they don't want me to do something bad. So like a scene like that, just, you know, you look at it and you're just going, oh my goodness, you know.
He thought it through.
Yeah, and these are things that we all, I believe, we all pick up on, even if we don't like consciously pick up on them. You know what I'm saying? Like it could be a subconscious thing.
What you're saying, I think that's a perfect example that demonstrates the unity of cleverness and clarity, and I'm guessing that is, I mean, it in a way we can pretty easily. I can only frame that in an admirable sense, because essentially the practical concerns have been accomplished, but also something more, and then something more that is really hard to attain. That it's very admirable. It's like, wow, that's high art or what have you, right?
Right. And Alfred Hitchcock was like the master at making sure these things could not be cut, right? Like he only shot enough that the films had to be edited the way they were. You know, he didn't give away a lot of creative control, and he's just, you know, I think he's just wonderful.
I know what you know. You mentioned that you were looking for a more esoteric example, but I actually bring Hitchcock into a lot of my comics classes, and I recently taught a teen class, and I brought up Hitchcock, and I said, "Who here's heard of Alfred Hitchcock?" Talk about 16, 17-year-olds, none of them. So
yeah.
I think there's evidence, or at least anecdotal evidence, to your assertion that, you know, this is something that we're losing touch with, and we need to go back and look at a little bit more carefully.
Right. I think Akira Kurosawa has a lot of stuff like that in his movies. Seven Samurai, you could so much subtext to all the scenes.
And plus, Toshiro Mifune is really easy on the eyes. I could look at that guy all day. Him and The Rock are like two guys that I could just stare at forever. I don't know what that reveals about me, but did you have anything to throw in on this whole idea of like the struggle between clarity and subtlety and cleverness, Rob? Something you fight with?
I'm slightly afraid to, because I am a guitarist, so I might actually start soloing and getting really indulgent, metaphorically and literally. So no, I think that covers it very well.
Okay. All right. So then the next thing that I'm curious about hearing from both you guys on is the aboutness of the project, the thing that we discover through the actual crawl part of it. You know, I just did an episode of the Comics Are Great show with a photographer, Peter Baker, and I was surprised to discover that his particular style of photography is he goes to the location and he just shoots a boatload of photography. And I asked him, like, well, you know, how do you know if it's a good shot? And he's like, not until I put them all out on a table and look at them all. And then I noticed, like, out of these 300 bad shots are like 6 really good shots. So he does like this ubiquitous, just like grab everything and hoard it and then find the aboutness after the fact. Whereas like sometimes, for me, it'll be like it'll just grab me. Like so have that aesthetic arrest. Like that's what this is about. So I'm curious, you know, how have you engaged with and found the aboutness of the things that you've worked on? Is it something you started with premise and then the aboutness reveals itself through the recombining of pieces over and over again, like writing on your index cards, or is it something that you front end where it's like this is a story for this kind of person? This is the fictional client I'm making up, and I'm making a story for them, so this has to address this particular topic. Because I've personally done both. I'm curious, like what you guys have done with the things you made. I'll start with you, Rob.
Oh, well, I honestly I've experimented with a variety of approaches. I mean, my comics work, for the most part, it has been work where I've been the client, and it's allowed me to just experiment and grow. I mean, uh, where I've done the just create and then find essentially the sort of this bigger pattern in the narrative as I go through an episodic creation. That's what happened in Art Geek Zoo, and then I decided to emphasize themes that started to come up from making it. Then, but at the same time, like I'm experimenting with the current mini comic I'm making, with a bit more of I guess, a Pixar-ish approach, which I'm really curious to hear Cole's reaction to that, because they're using this interesting like prototyping. They inject part of it's a resource management thing where they have the resources to do this, but they'll grow stories almost genetically in where they will like execute sometimes a portion or a complete story where going from a pitch to growing it and shaping it and then tossing it and evolving it and combining and all that kind of stuff, where like even in the book by Ed Mull, I think, and oh gosh, it was written with a, was it Kate
Imagination Inc.
Yeah, Creativity Inc. Yes.
Yeah, Creativity Inc.
And so they talked about this. What's that new movie that's coming out? But basically, it was one of the sort of things mentioned over and over in the book as like, oh, this is a really hard project. We don't know if it's going to come out, but they kept using it as examples. The one that has all the component emotions involved. I should know the title of the movie, but
yeah, I don't know it either.
I'll look it up while you guys talk about it.
That's always fun. But anyway, but it's funny because like I read about the process, I see it working for them. Obviously, I don't have the resources of Pixar, but I think it's
Inside Out.
Inside Out. That prototyping, I don't know. I guess I'm hooked on that kind of thing where it's like a next stage after like getting past the generation where it's like, am I reacting to this rough draft at all? And then do it again and do it again until I start reacting to it, and then I've found a path, and then I'll flesh that out. And that's what I've been doing with this current comic. I don't know if that answered your question. I went around a few different blocks there, but because I'm also curious, in addition to answering that, like, what do you think, Cole, about that prototyping thing too, on top of all this?
To be totally honest, the way the animation films are written at studios is just an absolute mystery to me. No, and I've had people talk, like I know the process, and my instinct is always like, you keep the cooks in the kitchen to a minimum, and it feels like these guys are like, like we were. My little girl is currently obsessed with Big Hero 6, and we were watching it, and it's like, okay, it was written by two guys, but even though it's written by two guys, I know that they've gone through story meetings with more than two guys, and I have no clue how that works, and like
it's like, but imagine if you just had infinite critique meetings that you could call. So you're working on the same things, and you could be like, okay, time to join Cole's Brain Trust critique meeting, and then you get a lot of feedback on what you're making. I mean,
and I obviously it works well for animation. I don't know if I could do that. I would be interested to try, but I think that just this, just this, the last couple weeks, I got invited to a thing at the Utah Valley University where they were looking for scripts. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I sent this guy your script, a script that I had written, and basically you can have like this conference with this guy who'll give you some script notes, but it's in front of a class, and the class has all read the script, and everyone's read the script, and they're all going to kind of you're going to go and be critiqued and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Oh, great, like whatever I can do to be a better writer."
That sounds so uncomfortable.
It was incredibly uncomfortable, and I was just like, I'm gonna just again, like, oh great, like this guy, like they were bringing in this guy that, like, I think it's like thousands and thousands of dollars for him to do notes on your script, and that they were gonna do it for free. This is great, and all I have to do is be super uncomfortable in front of people. And I really felt the whole time that it was like, it was a very unfair situation. Like, I felt like I was kind of ambushed because I didn't fully understand what it was going to be like. And I go and talk to classes. People will invite me to come talk to their classes about filmmaking and stuff. And so I'll show up, and I got my spiel. I can play the crowd, and I walked in kind of doing that. And then I realized that, like, I was being critiqued. I wasn't being like, "Hey, I'm helping you." It's just like, I had just walked into a den of wolves, and that's over exaggerating, but it was really uncomfortable, and I left kind of feeling like those guys didn't get it. Like, this room of people didn't get it, and one of the students came up afterwards and was like, I really think this is a great script, but like up to that point I'm like, everyone here hates my script, and it was a first draft. Somehow I was like working on I had finished my third draft, but somehow the first draft was sent to him, so I'm like, okay, I have 2 drafts later. I mean, it was really bad, and so to be like that in an animation situation, I think it would be a little hard, but I also don't feel like I write, like if I was writing an animated movie, I would expect to go through that situation. But, like when you're trying to do like an independent film, which is really centered on one person's vision or very few people's vision, you kind of just have to say, let's make sure this vision gets out there. And but again, like watching The Incredibles special features, Brad Bird's like, "Oh, we were gonna start the movie like this, and we had like this," and I'm like, "Holy mackerel!" Like, that is, like I'm very interested to see at what point do they go from all their story meetings and their pitches and their storyboards and all this stuff to somebody sitting down and actually writing a script. Like, how does that get to that, or does that ever even happen? I think that's my mystery, is how does it end up being 2 people writing a script?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know that 100%, but like to kind of twist it back to Jersey's question too. And like I read that book, I listened to the Audible book I think twice or what have you, and I have a whatever armchair observer rough understanding of what they're doing, but not
Right.
to any high sense of detail. But like what I'm getting the impression, hearing your situation with the critique and versus what they're doing, and actually what I'm doing, and and it's I just got this insight that, well, what I'm looking for is what's moving someone, right? And I think that's just maybe a style preference, looking for that kind of thing. And if it's a safe environment for the critique, or if it's well understood that that's what's going on, that sounds desirable to me. But like, whereas you sound like it's more of a like you would have a different approach to getting that aboutness, whereas I would be like, oh, that made someone mad or cry or sad or whatever. I'm like, yes, that's the scent of the story. I'm going to follow that.
Right. Right.
And
I think. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, but that's exactly where I'm curious now. Like, how do you do that then? How do you find that aboutness I guess, internally?
Well, hopefully I can answer this question with, and also answer Jersey's question. I pretty much always tell the story and then let the theme and the aboutness kind of come about. But I really, really wish that I was the kind of writer that could do it up front. But a lot of times when I sit there and go, okay, let's think about the theme, and there was a time when I came up with this formula where it's like, you come up with a theme, and then you have a character who is your main character who like basically needs to come to that theme, so they're opposite of that theme, and then you have like it was like this formula that you could plug in, and like the antagonist is against the theme and the whatever. And I don't know how
Sure.
intelligent it was. It was something I was trying to figure out at one point. But
Well,
my
Cole, have you
my
heard of? Have you heard of? I'm sure you've heard of Dramatica, right?
right, right. And
Yeah.
I haven't looked into it. I mean, I have the book and I haven't used the software, but um,
That
I
basically
think
operates on the same kind of principle as like they call it the grand argument theory of storytelling. And I did an episode. If anybody wants to dig into this, Comics Are Great episode 10. I talked with Luis Escobar, who's a storyboard artist on The Simpsons, and he was like going on and on about Dramatica as he was explaining it to me. I'm like, this sounds like math. This sounds like an equation. You put these
yeah,
pieces in a row, and it generates story.
right, right. But I think my problem is when I start with a theme, my themes are kind of lame. Like they're just like love conquers all. Okay. And I've even like looked up and said, okay, what are some themes, like some major themes of like books, and like I'm gonna keep a catalog so I can kind of say, okay, I want to tell this story, but my themes are always much better when I I just try to write write the story I want, and themes are like you could ask somebody what do you think the theme of Jaws is, and five people will come up with five different
Yep.
you know so so and maybe Steven Spielberg had one, and it's not any of those five, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, as long as we can understand that there's something there, a lot of times somebody will read you'll read a story, and or like my wife will read one of my scripts and she's like, oh yeah, this is a good theme for this, and it wasn't necessary, I wouldn't have worded it like that.
So that is interesting. It is really going to be up to interpretation in the end, anyway. Which sounds
Right.
pretty pragmatic.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, somebody's phone is going off, and
That's a phone. Okay, that's a phone.
shared hotel room.
Another book to check out for people listening or watching that goes into this a little bit more is The Art of Dramatic Writing by Lajos Igri, I think is the way you pronounce it. And he's it's mostly about playwriting, but he talks a lot about this kind of like being able to distill everything down to a central argument or thematic statement, right? So like he takes Romeo and Juliet and he says like love conquers all, or love is more powerful even than death. Is like the one he comes up with for that. And like, and he talks about these internal rules, like everything has to be there in support of the argument that you're making. I myself have talked about this as like how I've approached writing in the past, like especially when I'm doing freelance writing, like when I do like the Captain Seriously books, it's incumbent upon me to express a theme that is given to me by the client. Like we want a story about this particular thing that kids are going through in school right now, right? So okay, I got to write something that's about that, but also make it cool, so it's not just me yelling at children to be good, right? So in that way, it can be kind of like a front-ended design constraint, going back to some of our earlier discussion about like knowing limitations of the thing that you're working on. But then I think of something Dan Mishkin has said to me repeatedly, is that like he thinks that it's I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he has expressed that he discovers whatever the meaning of the story, the aboutness of the story, through actually just investigating the characters and the situation and premise. Right, it starts with either an interesting title or interesting character, interesting premise, and then as he starts doing the what-if questions, like you were talking about, Cole, then the meaning starts revealing itself, right? It's like getting to know a person, right? You don't just go up to a person and say like, you're about this, right? You discover
Right.
what they're about, and even your assumption of what they're about isn't necessarily the long and short of that person. It's just your interpretation of the person, right?
Yeah. No, I think. I mean, I don't. I feel like I would be a better writer if I could front load that, but that's just not happening right now in my life. It's something I wish I could do. I think it would be very interesting to have a really great theme. And they often say like a movie, a movie is about the last 20 minutes, and like taking like the Iron Giant, the idea of him being a gun, and then the theme being you can choose who you want to be. That's the theme of the movie, and it's literally said.
Yeah.
But that stuff isn't introduced until the very end of the movie, but we walk away with it, right?
Yeah.
The idea that he's a weapon really doesn't come in till like almost the third act. It's kind of set up in the end of the second act, and then the third act is kind of dealing with that. But um, to be able to work from a theme like that, I think would be pretty awesome. But again, I have to explore to find it myself. That's the kind of writer I am.
Can we just agree that Iron Giant might be the most perfect superhero movie ever made?
Yes.
I have
Yeah,
not.
I think so.
What's that, Rob?
I think so. I need to watch it again. It's been a long time, but I've heard it so many times.
This is something I've been thinking about. Is it bad that I kind of want Brad Bird to fail at live action movies so he can go back to making like life-changing animated movies? Like, because I really have so much respect for him, and I really want more Iron Giants and Incredibles.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily overly excited about Mission Impossibles or Tomorrowland. It's like, in the most gentle way, how can I try to get this man to go back to doing the things that really matter to me, I guess.
Maybe be his producer. I don't know.
Just come in and say, hey, enough of this live action stuff.
Yep. You make it rain super touching animated hero movies, and I'll make it rain all the cash.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, at least we got Big Hero 6. We're on the path back to good superhero movies for young people in animated form.
Yeah.
But, okay. I'm looking at the clock, just seeing how much time we got. I want to respect everybody's time here. So, do you guys feel? Is there any place else we should go, Rob, before we go on the ground?
No, not at all. Like this was, yeah. we've been going all over the place. We may as well notice that we are on the ground.
Going on the ground. Yep.
In a good way, good kind of adventure way, explorational.
Yes, we're entering into the narrow paths of the dungeon crawl, so it's time to get a little bit lower. And is that goblin sweat I smell? So okay, on the ground is where we talk about like the more practical applications of all this thinking that we do. So, Cole, you mentioned that you do a lot of writing on index cards. I'm curious. I mean, this is where we just get into like notebook porn, which is, it's like I just went through a period where I was looking for the perfect bag, and it was a fun hunt to find the perfect bag to carry all my stuff in. I did find it, but so I think like information capture devices and such is actually really, really cool stuff to think and talk about. I'm curious, Cole, what do you use for all the different kinds of writing that you do? Besides index cards.
Yeah, I use I have a Moleskine notebook that I carry in my pocket. I decided to swap it out with instead of carrying a wallet, a Moleskine has like a little pocket in it. So I'm like, this is what it's gonna be, And I think I've gone through. This thing is just anything, right? Like I write anything, quotes, ideas, journal entries. It's my catch-all. And then when I actually start doing some more writing, I use Evernote. The nice thing about Evernote is that I can use it on my laptop as well as my iPhone. So if I have an idea that I can throw that out there, and then it's searchable, and it's it's really nice. And then um, that's pretty much it for idea capturing. I got my cards, and then I'll write an outline in a document, like just a Word document, and then I write in the screenplays in Movie Magic Screenwriter.
Oh, I've not heard of this Movie Magic Screenwriter.
Yeah, there's two major screenwriting softwares that I don't know if that's true anymore. I think it's kind of, but that was at one point. There was two: Final Draft and Movie Magic Screenwriter, and both of them would swear to you that they're the official screenwriting software of the industry. Turns out Final Draft is a little bit more used, but both of them can create identical scripts. The formatting is all the same, so it doesn't really matter. And now there's a ton of other software and stuff. So, but the reason I use Movie Magic Screenwriter is because I won a free copy of it at a film festival.
That's all it takes sometimes to get you to commit to a certain ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Game with the frame. Okay, but yeah, if it works the same, because I've heard of Final Draft, but I had not heard of Movie Magic Screenwriter, so that's just a good one to know that there's other options out there. Interesting that you say Evernote too, because I know, Rob, you have repeatedly talked about that as being one of your main capture sites.
Yeah, it's for Evernote, it's mostly capturing. It's almost like a scrapbooking style capture now. It's like my private Pinterest overall. I do a lot of readable article capture, key doodles or whatnot that are related to like projects. But it's like it's a second tier tool for me. I mean, it's always around and I use it, but it inherently ends up being reference as far as capture and more early creative process stuff. The two big things I use are I use my note cards, which are I use 3x5s in this little Oxford billfold, which is has made many an appearance on our podcast.
Yes, it is.
It's wearing out. So I don't know. They last a while though, but I literally have this with me all the time. And in a nutshell, it has like this front place where you can put some note cards in. You can stash extra note cards in the middle, and then it has this sort of pocket in the back to like stash ones that you've already written on or what have you. So, I have mentioned this on the podcast before too, but then with that, I actually will bring those into Evernote, kind of scrapbook style, through the Fujitsu ScanSnap.
Yeah, Fujitsu.
Which is I don't know, feels like an indulgence because I used to just sort of prop up my note cards on something and take photos with my camera, smartphone camera, and turn them into PDFs with that. But yeah, I don't know. I'd rather just put them on in a little stack and hit a button, and all of a sudden, bam, they're in Evernote. Anyway, but then the outlining thing I use is iThoughts HD. But paired with that to do other, like, how many words have I written so far, and what's what would be like a nice preview of this thing I'm writing. I use that paired with the app called Marked 2, because basically an iThoughts outline, and I used to have like some command line scripts that would transform OPML outlines into Markdown, and then I would preview the Markdown in Marked, right? But now it goes I just need two apps. It's straight from iThoughts HD to Marked.
And these are both Mac apps, right?
Yeah, they are Mac apps. Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, how about you, Jersey?
Well, it's very similar to me. I mean, for me, I do the index cards thing, and on my desk I always keep what Merlin Mann so affectionately called the hipster PDA, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's just 3x5 cards with like a mini binder clip holding them together. And this is for just capture throughout the day, and I use them for every leading to art cast. Like when we do the show, whoops, I grab what we were talking about during the episode, and
Nice.
for got to add these links to the show notes. And then there's always a moleskin on my person. And this is where I do all my story capture ideas, and I just flashed that real quick. That was like future ideas for Boulder and Fleet. It's also where because this is my I'm waiting in the car for something notebook, right? And that was why the hunt for the perfect bag was so important, because I needed a bag that carried all of my capture devices that were for every situation, right? But this is my waiting in the car device for okay, well, I'm waiting in the car. I'm rather than just look at Twitter or Facebook, it's time to jot down some thoughts and some future page ideas. I think I've got an actual page of Boulder and Fleet that already happened. I don't even know if you can see that. This is when I figured out the joke for when the metal girls were being too distracted by eating molybdenum and trading recipes about how to prepare it. But that was so the moleskins for that, and then I also carry around with me at all times a couple of dummies that I'm working on. So the Boulder and Fleet dummy that I'm working on for the webcomic is always on me, and then there'll always usually be one other project that I'm either doing for a freelance capacity or I'm doing for some other future book that's coming down the pipe. So these are the more what am I trying to say? These are more further developed. These are actually projects that are developed and in progress, right? And so then once they're completed, then they get scanned in, and then they get dropped into one of those cloud services like Dropbox or Box or whichever one you want to name. So then I can pull it up on my Surface, which is what I do all of my drawing on now. So, and this is always on me as well. So that's if let's say I'm waiting in the car and no ideas are hitting in the moleskin, well, I can get some inking done too. I mean, that's the thing I love about having that tablet on me at all times, is I can always switch gears and work on actual finished work all out of the same bag. Right?
Yeah, that's very nomadic.
Yeah, it's almost to the point where it doesn't feel quite natural to work out of my office anymore. I was trying to get some inking done in the office this week, or just today, and I was like, I almost feel like I need to go to a coffee shop now to actually get proper work done. It's weird.
It's funny.
But yeah, we're in a bold new time where we can have our offices with us everywhere. It's pretty great. Okay, so question in terms of I talked about in my examples different situations where I'll be capturing. So when you guys are doing prep work and capturing ideas for things, is this a focused activity that is scheduled, right? And I ask this for purely selfish reasons. One of the things I'm trying to play around with is do I need to because I've got my rig all set up so I can work anywhere, which means that every place is an opportunity to work. Maybe I need to recalibrate and say no, I need to have focused blocks of time to work on my stuff. So question, do you guys do ubiquitous capture of ideas and prep work? Everywhere you are, any time can be a capture moment? Or do you schedule times where it's I'm going to sit down and I'm going to fill out index cards for a couple hours and see what hits? Cole, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I usually plan that out. I mean, I keep my notebook with me, so if an idea hits me, I can write it down. I do have Evernote on my phone, but I don't have a keyboard for my phone, so anything that's more than 2 sentences starts getting to be a pain to write. So usually I will, if I'm at that point in my script where I need to be brainstorming and doing, whatever, I'll schedule that and sit down and say, okay, it's part of my writing process. So if I'm trying to write 2 hours every day and I'm at the brainstorming process part of the process, then I brainstorm for 2 hours,
Rob, do you have the focus? Oh, Rob, are you still here? Oh, I think we got some super latency going on, Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give this a quick shot.
Okay.
How about, yeah, I do both kinds of capture. I will do much like you guys described. I mean, there's times when getting things done method of sort of time management. Cranking widgets is, if you have just tasks that you need to execute, it's really nice to have those on standby. So if I try to have the ability to either be chipping away at a or ideas for the for dialogue or whatever, or thumbnailing, but creative stuff. But then of course I'll schedule longer sessions as well.
So it's a combination of both for sounds like both of you guys. So maybe I just need to implement at least like one dedicated session a week in addition to my ubiquitous capture. It sounds like the stream's already starting to kind of come apart at the seams a little bit here and there. But the good news is we made it up until the end when this happened. So I do want to wrap it up, and I want to wrap it up by saying, Cole, is there anything that people should look at today? Anybody who listens to the show or watched the show and says, like, Cole guy, he's got some smart ideas in that brain of his. What's the one thing you hope they'll go check out after listening to this today?
I still probably my Twitter is probably the best place. That's where I centralize everything. I'm working on my site, but not very quickly.
This is eventidecreative.com.
Yeah, there's some good stuff, and I need to start posting more, but I think for now my twitter.com/Coleglass is probably the best place to find. From there, you can go to other places.
Any other upcoming projects that we should keep an eye out for? Because I mean, people are going to be listening to this way after the fact too.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about how frustrating this is that I've recently finished some projects that now need to be sold, and will they see the light of day is a question. The Dragonfire is on Netflix. It's on Hulu. I have a couple other projects that we're trying to either find funding for or I'm writing, but nothing worth mentioning right now. That's the life of a filmmaker, I think, is kind of like, at what point does this not become secret? And it's not that it's secret, it's just you don't want to talk about projects that will fall or may fall through because so many of them do.
It's the same thing in publishing too, man. And I know you know because you are friends with a lot of cartoonists. But like, yeah, there's a lot of things that are like in the hopper for like 3 years, and you can't say anything about them. And then they finally drop. You're like, oh, did that drop? Okay, cool. I can finally say something about it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the traditional publishing and just media making in general, like big audience media making, is a very slow-moving machine, and that can be very frustrating for, especially somebody who I cut my teeth as a storyteller primarily doing webcomics. Like that's just so wonderful because I make the thing, I ship it, I'm done, right?
Right.
But yeah, well, we'll just have to have you back when the next thing that you do comes out.
Yeah, well, please do.
No, I love talking to you, man, and on one platform or another, we will wind up talking again. I hope you have a good time at Emerald City Comic Con this weekend. If anybody,
yeah.
I
was just gonna say it's my first time, so I'm excited to see how it is.
I've heard nothing but good things. I have not been myself, but I've heard great things about it. I'm sure you have a great time. But okay, well, Rob's stream is somehow we got like a whole boatload of latency, so I'm gonna wrap this one up on my own. But everybody just know that Rob is also, he's right there and he's smiling as I say all these things. So if you enjoyed this episode, a great way you can let us know is by going to iTunes, giving us a star review. You don't have to write a full review, just pick a star, however many you think we deserve. That helps more people find the show. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, giving it a thumbs up. That helps more people find the show as well. If you really got something out of the show, if you really, you tune in every 2 weeks to the LIA Cast, you're like, man, these guys are always on point. They always bring great guests, Great way you can thank us if you got a little extra cash is go over to our Patreon site. That's at patreon.com/leanintoart. You know, you can chip in a buck a month, and that will help bring us to our sustainable trade level of where we're actually being compensated for our time for making this show. So, and thanks to everybody who has been supporting us on the Patreon site. You guys are making this show possible, and we really, really appreciate all of your support and enthusiastic support. Really, it means a lot to us, and for everybody who you know, gives us reviews on iTunes and the thumbing up on the YouTubes. So, everybody, also please follow Cole Glass on Twitter, and that's at Cole Glass, right, Cole?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then Eventide Creative, and we'll link to all of the stuff we talked about in the show notes at leanintoart.com. So until next time, everybody, I've been Jersey Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jersey on Twitter. Rob has been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter. And this is the part where I say, okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right, I'm going to kill the stream, everybody. Good night. Thanks for hanging out with us.